Michael Cremo has agreed to spend some time with us here on Flight 1080. Now, before I get to him, let me just read some of the what I found on Wikipedia, okay? Michael Cremo is an American freelance researcher who identifies himself as a creationist and an alternative archaeologist. Some scientists have deemed his field as pseudo-scientific, and I have to start off right there. Michael Cremo, let me welcome you on board Flight 1080.
Good to be with you.
Thank you, sir. Now, when I read that, the last term that I read there, or that last word, pseudo-scientific, I was speaking with one of my friends about, not you, but other people who think outside the box, and they're criticized by scientists as practicing pseudoscience. And I find that interesting and fascinating and kind of closed-minded and almost anti-science, that attitude. Right? I mean, science is science. If you're pulling up these things and proving and challenging what is conventional knowledge, that's not pseudoscience. That is science. What's happening is their failure to adapt. I mean, science, if nothing else, is always progressing, right? Nothing is ever final, and nothing.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's like one of these terms that a certain group in the scientific world likes to label people with, whose opinions and ideas they disagree with. It often happens. It happens to researchers who have demonstrated things in the field of parapsychology. You know, they're often dismissed as pseudoscientists. Scientists who have dared to explore things like alien abductions and UFOs, there are some, and they get labeled as pseudoscientists. So it's a kind of name calling, and I think the real cure for it is just, well, let's deal with the facts rather than using ad hominem arguments like that, just calling people you don't like a bad name. Let's talk about the facts.
Right. Well, you know, those people are a bunch of idiots. How's that? Okay. So now, what are they so insecure about? What I understand that you've written a few books, right? One of them is called Forbidden Archaeology. Is that right?
Yeah, that's the main topic I deal with.
Okay. Tell me a little bit. What is this about? What does that mean?
Well, if you go to the average museum, you know, you'll see all kinds of archaeological artifacts, human bones, stone tools, things like that on display in the museum. But you only see the things that support the current dominant theories about human origins and antiquity. And the current dominant theory is that humans like us first appeared on Earth less than 200,000 years ago. So what you see in the museums kind of conforms to that. The evidence for a human presence, for humans of our type, only goes back that far. But, you know, if you look in the storerooms of those museums, you're going to find other artifacts and bones that tell a far different story, namely that humans like us have existed for vastly longer periods of time on Earth. There are human bones, human artifacts that archaeologists and geologists and paleontologists have discovered that put a human presence going back many millions of years on this planet. But you don't see that mentioned in the textbooks. You don't see those artifacts on display in the museum. There's a process of what I call knowledge filtration that operates in the scientific world. So in my book, Forbidden Archaeology, I've brought that evidence to light.
How old do you think, how long ago was man around? You say for many millions of years. Are we talking hanging out with the dinosaurs? Are we talking, how far back are we talking here?
During the time of the dinosaurs, even before, the time of the dinosaurs. In 1932 in Brownwood, Texas, a human skull and some human bones were discovered by road workers who were using dynamite to blast through a layer of limestone. And in the limestone, they found a human jaw, part of a human skull, a human femur, and other bones this limestone dates to the Carboniferous period. That's over 250 million years ago, going back very, very far in time, before the time of the dinosaurs even. So I think the actual history of our species goes right back to the very beginnings of the history of life on Earth.
Okay, speaking of the beginnings of mankind, I mean, do you believe in Adam and Eve? Do you believe that we started that way? What does the evidence point towards, in your opinion?
I think it does point towards something like that. A lot of my ideas about these topics are inspired by my studies in the ancient Sanskrit writings of India. But I think it's a common thread that runs through a lot of the ancient wisdom traditions, whether we're talking about the Bible or the Quran or the Vedas, the sacred books of ancient India, or American tribal knowledge or Pacific Islander knowledge. They all pretty much agree that humans have been around since the beginning, and whether you call the first couple Adam and Eve or by some other name, the idea is still there that we're not here by accident. We're not just molecular machines that have come about by chance through a process of evolution by natural selection, but rather we've been placed here on this planet for a purpose.
And this was so. I guess if you believe in Adam and Eve, you would have to believe in God. I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is that what we're looking at here?
Well, sometimes when people hear a word like God or soul, they turn off because they think it's something that requires belief or faith. It's not fact-based. It's not science-based. But I look at it in a different way. I look at it at the phenomenon that I'm a conscious being, you're a conscious being. Consciousness is very important. It's the most fundamental fact of our existence. You can't deny that you're a conscious being. I can't deny that I'm a conscious individual, personal being. None of our listeners can deny that. So I think it's normal, it's reasonable to suppose there must also be a source of all individual, personal, conscious beings that's also individual, personal, and conscious. So you can call it God, but to me, it's just a natural fact of existence.
We're speaking with Michael Cremo. If you have any questions, give us a call at 831-479-1080. So some of the things that lead you to your conclusions are what you call anomalous artifacts, correct?
Absolutely.
Now explain what this is.
Well, an anomalous artifact is an artifact that doesn't fit the current dominant paradigm or scientific consensus. It's a fact that contradicts what's in the textbooks. So the tendency for scientists is to ignore these things, put them aside, try to explain them away on very flimsy grounds. And some amazing anomalous artifacts were discovered in the state of California. You're in Santa Cruz, I'm here in LA. Well, in the 1860s and 70s, there was a gold rush in California, and miners came from all over the world to get the gold in the Sierra Nevada mountains at places like Table Mountain near the town of Sonora in the mountains there. And inside these tunnels, they were digging into the sides of mountains. The miners were finding human bones and human artifacts. They were finding obsidian spear points. They were finding stone mortars and pestles. And these came to the attention of Dr. J.D. Whitney, who was the chief geologist of the state of California. And he collected all these artifacts and wrote a scientific study about them. what makes these things so interesting to me is they were found in layers of solid rock 50 million years old. And keep in mind that today, most scientists think that humans capable of making such things didn't come into existence any earlier than about 200,000 years ago. So some of these artifacts from the California gold mines are still in the collection of the Museum of Anthropology at the University of California at Berkeley. But most people would never even suspect they're there. You have to be someone like me who's aware of the history of these things to understand what they really are.
479-1080, 218-5726. So at what age did the finding those artifacts in the ground, at what age does that suggest?
Well, if you've got human beings existing at the time those artifacts were made, according to the geology of the place, that would put humans like us present in California 50 million years ago. And, evidence like this continues to be discovered up to the present day, but, scientists often don't recognize it for what it is. A couple of years ago, a human bone was found at Olduvai Gorge in Africa. And it's a very famous place. Many important discoveries have been made there. But, these archaeologists found a bone. They said it's human, but it was in layers of rock 1,800,000 years old. So they said, well, it even though it looks human, it couldn't really be human because of the age of the formation which it's found. So this is how this, what I call process of knowledge filtration, operates. Scientists can be looking right at evidence for a human presence. They find a bone, they say it looks human, it's not like that of any ape or monkey or ape man, like Australopithecus or one of these other creatures that they think was halfway between human and ape. The bone looks completely human, but because it's found in a layer of rock 1,800,000 years old, they don't accept it as evidence for a human presence.
218-5726, by the way, with your text messages. That's 831-218-5726. Why would they want to cover up evidence like this? I mean, wouldn't that make them famous? Wouldn't that make them famous and rich? Why would they be so hesitant to accept what you present as evidence?
Yeah, sometimes scientists do report things like this. I know a geologist, her name is Virginia Steen McIntyre, and she was involved in dating an archaeological site in Mexico at a place called Hueyatlaco, which is near the town of Puebla in central Mexico. There, a team of Mexican and American archaeologists had uncovered some stone tools and weapons, and they wanted to know how old they were, so they called a team of geologists from the United States to do some dating studies of the site. And Virginia Steen McIntyre and her colleagues used 4 scientific methods to date the site. They got an age of 250,000 years. And, the archaeologists just refused to accept it. I mean, they could have said, wow, this is really fantastic. We'll have our name up in lights. But they wouldn't accept it. And when Virginia Steen McIntyre persisted and independently published the age for the site, she found her career was practically finished. She was labeled as a troublemaker, a maverick, a renegade, a publicity seeker. She lost a teaching position that she held. So why is this? Well, in one sense, it's just human nature. Scientists are very much in love with the theories that they create. And if they hear something that contradicts a theory that they very much love, they get angry. They, at the person who's telling them something wrong about the theory that they love. But I think there are deeper reasons for it, that have to do with power. There are different kinds of power in the world. Am I still with you?
Yes. Oh, yeah, absolutely. My co-host here, Joshua, has a question for you, Michael.
Hey, Michael.
It's kind of going on and on there. Sorry about that.
Oh, no, that's fine.
You got me going.
That's fine.
Hey, Michael, I got a question for you.
Sure.
What do you think about, I've heard and seen some evidence for the theory that in the past, humans might have been much taller. What do you think about that? Do you subscribe to that idea?
In a sense, I do. There's information from a lot of the different ancient wisdom traditions that in the past, humans and other living things were bigger than they are today. And even in terms of normal science, most scientists today accept that before 5,000 or 10,000 years ago, most living things were bigger than they are today. The bears were bigger, the wolves were bigger, the deer were bigger, the trees were bigger. In California, we've got the California redwood trees, some of which are thousands of years old. I think they're a holdover from that previous era. And, if you look in the Bible, there's the story of Goliath. In the ancient Sanskrit writings, it says that in previous ages, humans were bigger than they are today. And I think there is some evidence for that. But it's very difficult to verify. And one problem is that on the web, there are lots of photographs of large-sized human bones circulating that are unfortunately Photoshop jobs. They, if you try to track down the bone or the person who is alleged to have found it, you really don't get very far. I think one of the best documented cases came from late in the 19th century from a place called Castelnau in France, where an archaeologist, Dr. Lapouge, at this place called Castelnau, conducted an excavation and uncovered some large-sized human bones. For example, he discovered a human thigh bone or femur. And if an anthropologist has a thigh bone and can measure how long it is, he could tell you how tall the person was that had a thigh bone like that. So the bone in this case indicated the person who had it must have been 11 feet tall. So that's a pretty amazing case.
From Pasatiempo to Pebble Beach, Red Hot News Talk, AM 1080 KSCO Santa Cruz.
KSCO Santa Cruz Flight 1080 is back in the air. We're hanging out with Michael Cremo and Joshua Fontanilla, and you as well if you want to join us. 831-479-1080, 831-218-5726, DM at ksco.com with your emails. All right, Michael Cremo again joining us. We want to thank you again for joining us here on Flight 1080. Are you there?
Yes.
Okay, there we go.
With you.
Okay, Michael, we got some text messages here. Let's get to, first of all, before we get to that, we were talking about people, were we talking about giants? When you say that this evidence suggested people were up to 11 feet tall, are we talking the types of giants that are in the Bible?
I think the Bible is one example. There are other ancient wisdom traditions that also say that in previous ages, human beings were larger than they are today. Once I was in Russia, and there was a researcher that told me that in a mosque in Samarkand. They're said to have a skeleton of a human being 24 feet tall. So I wasn't able to go and verify that myself, but yeah, these kind of reports are there, and they also come from scientific sources. I mentioned the case of the French archaeologist from the late 19th century, Dr. Lapouge.
Yeah, Michael, how do you spell that? If someone wanted to look that up, Dr. Lapouge, do you know how to spell his last name?
Lapouge. And the site is called Castelnau in France. Castelnaw. I think it's one of the, there are lots of reports of discoveries of large-size human bones, many here in the United States. But the difficulty is if you try to track them down where they are now, it's almost impossible. Sometimes we hear they were in museum collections like the Smithsonian, but they're not there today.
Interesting. 479-1080. Are you ready to take some phone calls, Mr. Cremo?
Sure.
All right. Let's head out to Deer Creek. Gordy is up first. Thank you for your call, Gordy. You're in the air.
Thank you very much, Dave. Doctor, today we have DNA that we can trace back. I subscribe to Archaeological Magazine, and I noticed in here that MUC7, which is a genetic marker that's found in human saliva, has been traced back to 150 to 200,000 years ago to Africa. That's one bit of evidence that humans have been around longer than the current popular paradigm. The second thing is excavations in Morocco uncovered a 300,000-year-old bone of some earliest members of Homo sapiens that was discovered in 1961. And with the, as I said, with the possibility of DNA, how we can link and we can actually map out how various versions of peoples, whether they're Neanderthals or Homo sapiens or the others, it looks to me like that these are all interbred into what we have today as what we call human beings. Do you have any comments about those discoveries?
Yes, I do. The Morocco discoveries from the Jirhoud caves are very interesting. They were reported earlier this year or late last year, and they do go back about 300,000 years, and they're considered to represent Homo sapiens. So I would say that discoveries like that show that science is moving in tiny steps. I'm talking about mainstream orthodox science is moving in tiny steps in the right directions. Yeah, when I first started doing my research for my book, Forbidden Archaeology, in the 1990s, most scientists thought human beings like us had been around for about 100,000 years. So they gradually pushed it back to about 200,000 years. And now they're starting to think about pushing it back to about 300,000 years. But I would say if you look at all the evidence that's ever been discovered, you'd have to push our human origins back many, many millions of years.
Yes, there was also a discovery in Ethiopia recently that looks like it's 450,000 years that we have the skull fragments that came out of there. I don't have the complete articles on that, but I agree with you that, in fact, here's my thesis, that human origins occurred at the same time other life forms occurred on this earth. And since then, the genetics, again, we can trace these back so far, according to what we find in archaeology, even though we have difficulty in bringing things out to openly discuss these. But if we look at the way genetics work and how long it takes for these things to occur, I think we can duplicate in reverse the model that brought us to this current point. And by doing that, by reversing, the so-called look at genetics, that we would determine that at one point in time, several millions of years ago, was the beginning of man. And just like every other species on this planet, there's no indication that there was anything new introduced. There were just all of these life forms that appeared about the same time, and then they slowly died off at different times, or they interbred with other forms of life to create what we call another species, but they're not really. That we just integrated those into our current form.
Michael, any comments?
No, that's going pretty much along the lines that I also accept. I think humans and other forms of life were present on Earth. They came here at about the same time of each other. It'd be many, many, many millions of years ago, and that they persisted in their different lineages. Some of them may have died out, as the caller is suggesting. I speak about these things a bit in my book, Human Devolution, where I propose an alternative to the current Darwinian evolutionary concepts of human origins. So, I think the caller is on the right track.
Michael, a couple questions for you. Joshua again here. And you can take them whatever order you want. The Inca stones, what do you think about those? And ancient technology, like, evidence for, like, electricity or flying machines in, like ancient Egypt or, ancient times?
As far as the Inca stones, those are round stones that come from Peru. They were discovered by a Dr. Cabrera in the mid-20th century, in the 1960s, somewhere around that time. And the interesting feature is they have engravings on them, and some of the engravings show human beings and dinosaurs. So that's kind of interesting. And one of the problems, however, you could take them in one sense as evidence that humans existed during the time of the dinosaurs, which would be about, starting around 65 million years ago, because that's when the dinosaurs went extinct. So you could take them as evidence for humans coexisting with dinosaurs. Now, one of the difficulties is that Dr. Cabrera never revealed the exact place where these things come from, so it hasn't really been possible to independently verify, okay, these things are present in geological formations that date back to the time of the dinosaurs. In principle, I'm prepared to accept them, but I think some further research needs to be done to show the exact locations where these objects come from. As far as evidence of advanced technology in ancient times is concerned, as I mentioned a little bit earlier in the show, a lot of my ideas about these things are inspired by my studies in the ancient Sanskrit writings of India, which speak about flying machines, spacecraft, robotics, and things like that, going back many millions of years. So it's kind of interesting that you have accounts of such things in, the writings of an ancient civilization. They also described weapons resembling modern nuclear weapons. They were called brahmastras. And I find it interesting that Robert Oppenheimer, who was the physicist in charge of the American program to develop the Manhattan Project. He was present when the first atomic bomb was tested at Alamogordo in New Mexico in 1945. And, in addition to being a great physicist, he was also a student of the ancient Sanskrit writings of India. So he was asked, what was it like to be, present, when this atomic bomb was first tested? And he began to recite passages from the Bhagavad Gita, which is one of the ancient Indian texts, about how God had manifested in a form as brilliant as thousands of suns gathered together in one place, and that this form, this universal form, was destroying everything in existence. So he felt that he had kind of tapped into that destructive power that's there in the universe.
And Michael, what kind of evidence is there to support ancient technologies? I mean, what is out there that would suggest electricity usage or anything else like that? What types of evidence exist?
Well, you have different categories of evidence. You've got what's written in the text of some of these ancient cultures. They describe things that supposedly were invented thousands of years later. That's one source of evidence. Then another source of evidence is the carvings that we see on ancient structures. For example, researchers in Egypt have pointed to carvings on temple structures from the ancient Egyptian buildings, where there are carvings showing what appear to be electricity generating objects.
Mm-hmm. I've seen those. They look like light bulbs.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's
giant light bulbs.
Category. And then you get some indications of advanced astronomical knowledge and the ability to make machines that would compute astronomical positions, like the Antikythera mechanism, which was found in the Mediterranean Sea in a Greek shipwreck. And then, so there are different categories of evidence. Now, the technology itself doesn't survive very long. I mean, we think of our technology as very hard, but, studies have been done on, what would happen to the remains of our technological civilization if humans were to disappear from the earth today. Mm-hmm. There have been interdisciplinary scientific studies on that. And, they've shown that after a few thousand years, the weather, tsunamis, fires, earthquakes, and just the normal process of the oxidation of metals and things like that would result in, after 10 or 20,000 years, there would be hardly anything left at all that you could really detect unless you were specifically looking for it.
And that's something I've always wondered myself too. Do you have any thoughts of, if we were to disappear today, what would be left? Like the Egyptians have left these pyramids. We have, there it is. They existed. There it is. There's a monument to them. What would be our reminder that we existed here? Do we have anything today that is comparable in permanence as the pyramids?
This topic came up just this year. There were some astrophysicists who were asking questions like that. They concluded that not very much of our kind of technology would survive. What you might find, they concluded, after very, very long periods of time, would be something like radioactive isotopes. If, God forbid, there's a nuclear war that's responsible for our disappearance on Earth, the radioactive isotopes would persist for a long time, and for thousands and even millions of years. Some of these radioactive isotopes that are produced during a nuclear explosion would last for a very long time, and anybody that detected them would be able to tell that they're not natural. They would only occur as a result of some technological activity like the explosion of a bomb or the destruction of a nuclear power plant. So that's one thing. Also, in our modern technology, we produce a lot of artificial chemicals that persist for long periods of time. So, but as far as the structures and the cars and the artifacts themselves, they wouldn't really survive. So that may be why the Egyptians made their monuments of stone rather than concrete and glass. And
how advanced do you think their technology was? I mean, do you think that it was? How advanced do you think it was?
Pretty advanced. It would be pretty hard.
Computers, bicycles. I mean,
well, like I was saying, a lot of my ideas come from the descriptions of these things that I find in the ancient Sanskrit writings, which, for example, describe spacecraft. They were called vimanas, and some of them, according to the descriptions, were used in warfare. There was a description in the Bhagavad Purana of a spaceship that attacked a city on Earth. The name of the city is Dwarka, and there's a city of that name even today on the coast of India, on the Arabian Sea in northwestern India. And the descriptions of this craft say it was made of metal, it was flying through the air, it would sometimes appear to be in several places simultaneously, so that the forces that were trying to, on the ground, who were trying to defend the city, couldn't shoot it down with their weapons. And their weapons, the way they're described, they resemble anti-missile missiles, sort of. So this craft had the ability to appear several places at once. And in modern military technology, there's a similar thing. If a country has an intercontinental ballistic missile with a nuclear warhead, they equip them in such a way that they can deploy decoy warheads to confuse the radar of the country that's trying to defend against them. So, it's pretty amazing that you find descriptions of these things that are just coming into use in our modern militaries. We find descriptions of similar things in these very, very ancient writings among people who were supposedly uncivilized.
We're speaking with Michael Cremo, and again, we only got about 2 more minutes, Michael, so let's let our audience know how they can find out more about your books or more about these topics in general, but let's promote your books. Let's find out how we can get a hold of those.
Okay, they're pretty widely available, but if people want to come to my personal website, mcremo.com, mcremo.com, they can find information about me and my work, and there's information about how to order my books and Actually, we have a special promotion. My latest book is called My Science, My Religion. It's a collection of 24 papers that I've presented about these topics at mainstream, which many people find very surprising. But it's true. And whoever orders that book from my website, mcremo.com, mcremo.com, will also have the chance to request a free copy of the Bhagavad Gita, one of these ancient Sanskrit writings that Robert Oppenheimer quoted from when the atomic bomb was first tested in Alamogordo, New Mexico in 1945. So that would be the first stop, my website, mcremo.com, mcremo.com.
All right, Michael. Again, I want to thank you for joining us here on Flight 1080, and I wish you the best.
Fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, sir. That was Michael Cremo joining us on here on Flight 1080. What do you think about that, Joshua?
Pretty interesting stuff.
Man, dude, the thing about doing an interview on the phone is there's that slight delay and also the volume difference. So I don't want to just talk right over him and cut him off and ask him this, and that. But man, that was some good stuff. Also, a lot of people would say different.
Yes,
different stuff. 479-1080. We're going to be right back. We'll be back with Joshua Fontanilla and you if you want to join us. We'll talk about this and other topics. We've got a whole bunch of stuff, so keep it tuned in. KSEO Santa Cruz, and we'll be back.